The professional arrangement, Marcus Chun Rodriguez, adjusted his tie for the third time as he stood in the marble lobby of Prague's most exclusive hotel. The merger talks had gone better than expected, but tonight's dinner with the conservative Czech investors would seal the deal, destroy months of careful negotiation. Couldn't afford any cultural missteps. And going alone would send the wrong message about his commitment to building local partnerships. The advertisement had been discreet, cultural companions for discerning professionals. Educated, multilingual, sophisticated. He'd specified someone with knowledge of Czech, business, customs, and local culture. What he hadn't expected was the woman who approached him near the fountain tall, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of quiet confidence that immediately set her apart from the polished socialites he usually encountered. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Zara Novotna." Her English carried just a hint of accent, making each word sound deliberate. "I understand you need someone familiar with Prague's business community for dinner tonight." Marcus found himself studying her face longer than necessary. She wore a simple black dress that was elegant without being flashy. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes' professional politeness, masking something more complex underneath. "Marcus is fine," he said, offering his hand. "And yes, dinner. At Terrassa U's late studden with the Moravec Industries Board. High-stakes, traditional crowd. I can't afford to look like another American tech bro who doesn't understand the local culture." Zara's eyebrow lifted slightly. "You're not American. Half Spanish, half Taiwanese, raised in London, based in San Francisco," he rattled off automatically. "But to them, I'm just another Silicon Valley outsider trying to buy my way into their market, and are you?" The question was asked mildly, but Marcus caught the edge beneath it. He paused, caught off guard by her directness. Most people in her position would have simply agreed with whatever he said. "I suppose that depends on your definition of buying in." Zara glanced at her watch, a simple silver piece, not the luxury timepiece he'd expected. "We should go. Traffic to Lesser Town can be unpredictable, and arriving late would definitely send the wrong message." The car ride through Prague's winding streets was filled with Zara's efficient briefing about each dinner guest, their backgrounds, family connections, business philosophies, even their preferred conversation topics. But Marcus found himself more interested in the way her voice changed when she mentioned certain historical details, or how her fingers drummed against her purse when she was thinking. "You seem to know quite a bit about these people personally," he observed as they crossed the Vltiva River. "Prague isn't that large a city if you move in certain circles," she replied carefully. "Plus, I've done my research." "What do you usually do when you're not this?" For the first time, Zara's professional composure slipped slightly. "I'm finishing my master's degree in behavioral psychology. This work helps pay for tuition and living expenses." Marcus felt an unexpected pang of guilt. Here he was, casually spending more on one dinner than she probably made in months, while she juggled graduate studies with what must be exhausting evening work. But before he could respond, they arrived at the restaurant. The dinner was a success largely due to Zara's subtle guidance and natural ability to steer conversation toward topics that engaged each guest. She didn't just know the cultural context. She understood the psychology behind it. By dessert, the normally reserved Moravec had invited Marcus to tour their Prague facilities personally as they walked back to the hotel. Prague's illuminated castle creating a fairy tale backdrop, Marcus realized he didn't want the evening to end. "Thank you," he said as they reached the lobby. "You probably saved me from a very expensive mistake tonight." Zara smiled on this time. It reached her eyes. "You're welcome, Marcus. Good luck with your merger." She turned to leave, but something in her voice made him call after her. "Wait, would you like to get coffee tomorrow before I fly back?" The pause stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither had planned for. Beneath the surface, the small cafe Zara had chosen was tucked away in a narrow street far from the tourist areas. The kind of place where locals lingered over newspapers and conversations that stretched for hours. Marcus arrived first, fidgeting with his phone and second-guessing his decision to ask her to coffee. What was he doing? He had a flight to catch, investors to update, a company to run. When Zara walked in, she looked different in daylight, younger somehow, wearing jeans and a cream sweater that made her seem more like the graduate student she was, and less like the polished professional from the night before. She ordered in rapid check, then switched to English when she noticed Marcus watching. "Double espresso and a pastry I can't pronounce," she said, settling across from him. "Victor makes the best kolae in Prague, Victor, the owner. His family has run this place for 3 generations. She gestured toward the elderly man behind the counter, who waved back with flour-dusted hands. "He knew my grandmother. She used to bring me here when I was little, before she died." There was something in the way she said it, casual but careful, made Marcus realize she was testing him, waiting to see if he'd offer empty. The morning after, the alarm on Marcus's phone buzzed insistently, cutting through the haze of sleep that felt far too brief. Sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then it all came rushing. Back dinner coffee that had turned into hours of walking through Prague's quiet streets, and Zara's laugh echoing off ancient buildings as she told him stories about her childhood. He'd missed his original flight. Marcus sat up, running his hands through his hair. He never missed flights. His assistant Emma would be sending increasingly frantic emails. His calendar would be in shambles. And the follow-up meeting with his legal team would have to be rescheduled. But as he reached for his laptop, he realized he didn't care as much as he should have. Across the city, Zara was having her own moment of reckoning. She stood in the tiny kitchen of the apartment she shared with Alina, staring at an untouched cup of tea while her roommate prepared for her. "Shift at the hospital. You're being unusually quiet," Alina observed, tying her auburn hair back in a practical ponytail. "How did the client dinner go last night?" "Fine," Zara said automatically, then caught herself. Alina had been her closest friend since they started university together, and she could read Zara's moods better than anyone. Alina paused in gathering her things. "Just fine? You didn't come home until almost 3 in the morning," he talked. The words felt inadequate. How could she explain that she'd spent 4 hours with a stranger who somehow felt less foreign than most people she'd known for years? That when he'd asked about her research on behavioral patterns and decision-making, he'd actually listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk about himself, but asking follow-up questions that showed he understood the implications of her work. "Zara," Lena's voice carried the gentle firmness she used with difficult patience. "You know the rules you set for yourself about keeping work separate from your personal life? There's usually a good reason for those rules." "I know." Zara stared at her reflection in the tea's surface. It's just ... He wasn't what I expected. Elena sat down across from her, abandoning her rushed morning routine. "Tell me," he asked me about my thesis, not because he was trying to impress me, or because he felt obligated to make conversation, but because he was genuinely curious about why people make decisions that contradict their stated values. Zara looked up when I explained my research about the gap between intention and action. He said it reminded him of his own life, how he'd built this successful company, but wasn't sure when he'd stopped enjoying the work itself. And nothing. He's probably on a plane back to London right now, and I have a thesis to finish and rent to pay. But even as she said it, Zara knew it wasn't that simple. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Lena raised an eyebrow as Zara's cheeks flushed slightly. "Is that him?" Zara read the message twice before showing it to Elena. "Thank you for last night. I know I said I was flying out this morning, but I decided to extend my stay an extra day. Would you like to see Prague through the eyes of someone who's discovering it for the first time?" Elena whistled softly. "He missed his flight for you. Doesn't know Prague well. Maybe he just wants a tour guide." "Zara." Elena's voice was patient but firm. "Rich men don't miss flights and extend international trips for tour guides. They hire them." The distinction hung in the air between them. Zara had been careful to keep her escort work professional, and her clients understood the boundaries. But Marcus felt different, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical safety and everything to do with the way he'd listened when she talked about her dreams of opening her own practice someday. "What are you going to tell him?" Alina asked. Zara looked at her phone again. The rational part of her mind cataloged all the reasons this was a bad idea. He lived on another continent. He was clearly wealthy enough that their worlds would never truly align, and most importantly, she'd met him through work. But she remembered the way his eyes had lit up when she'd shown him the hidden courtyard behind St. Vita's Cathedral, and how he'd admitted that he hadn't felt genuinely curious about anything in months. She typed back, "Meet me at Wenceslas Square. In an hour, bring comfortable shoes." Alina shook her head as she gathered her things. "Just ... be careful, okay? You have a tendency to give people the benefit of the doubt, even when you probably shouldn't." After Alina left, Zara sat alone with her cooling tea and the growing realization that she was about to cross a line she'd carefully maintained for 2 years. But for the first time in months, she felt genuinely excited about something that wasn't related to her thesis or her carefully planned future. Outside, Prague was waking up to another day, and somewhere across the city, Marcus was probably wondering if he'd completely lost his mind. Maybe they both had. Unfinished business 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself in Prague again, ostensibly to finalize contracts with Moravec Industries. The merger had been approved faster than anyone expected, but he'd convinced his board that maintaining a physical presence in the Czech market required additional groundwork. It wasn't entirely a lie, just not the complete truth. He'd exchanged messages with Zara sporadically since his extended stay. Careful, polite texts that revealed nothing about whether she thought of their long walks through the city, or the way conversation had flowed so naturally between them. She'd mentioned her thesis defense was approaching. He'd found himself genuinely invested in how her research was progressing. Now, standing outside Charles University's philosophy building, Marcus felt more nervous than he had before any business presentation. He'd told himself he was simply in the neighborhood after a meeting, but the coffee he'd bought as an excuse was growing cold in his hands. "Marcus." Zara's voice carried surprise, and something else he couldn't quite identify emerged from the building with an armload of books and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, looking every inch the graduate student rather than the polished companion from their first meeting. "I was in the area," he said, immediately regretting how rehearsed it sounded. "Thought I'd take a chance that you might be free for coffee." Zara glanced at her watch, and he noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. "I have office hours in 20 minutes. Of course, I should have called ahead." But she was already shifting her books to one arm. "Actually, let me cancel them. I could use the break, and my advisor, Professor Toma, would probably tell me I'm overthinking my final chapter anyway." They walked to Victor's cafe in comfortable silence, though Marcus found himself hyper-aware of the space between them and the way Zara nodded to several people they passed. This was her world academic, rooted, meaningful in ways his jet-setting lifestyle had never managed to be. "So," Zara said once they were seated with their usual orders, "are you really here for business, or should I be flattered that Prague has some other attraction for you?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. This was the Zara from their late-night conversations and afraid to push past pleasantries to something more substantial. "Honestly, both." Marcus set down his cup carefully. "The Moravec deal is real, but I could have handled the final details remotely. I wanted to see you again. Why? Because I haven't been able to concentrate on anything for 3 weeks." The admission felt dangerous. "I keep thinking about our conversation about decision-making theory, and whether people can actually change their fundamental patterns, or if they just convince themselves they're changing while following the same underlying motivations." Zara leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same intensity she might apply to a research subject. "And what conclusion have you reached?" "That I might be testing the theory." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "How so?" "I've built my entire career on calculated risks and measurable outcomes. Every decision gets filtered through potential profit margins and strategic advantages. But sitting here with you, this is the first thing I've done in years that makes absolutely no business sense." "Maybe that's not true," Zara said quietly. "Maybe you're just applying different criteria for what constitutes a worthwhile investment." Before Marcus could respond, the cafe door chimed, and an older man with wire-rimmed glasses approached their table. He spoke to Zara in rapid Czech, his tone carrying the affectionate exasperation of a mentor dealing with a brilliant but stubborn student. "Marcus, this is Professor Toma Novak, my thesis advisor," Zara said, switching to English. "Toma, this is Marcus Rodriguez, a Friend from London. The professor's eyes sharpened with interest as he shook Marcus's hand. The mysterious international friend Zara mentioned. You're the one who got her thinking about practical applications for her research in corporate environments. Marcus glanced at Zara, surprised. She'd been discussing him with her advisor. Tama, don't you have a lecture to prepare for? Zara's cheeks had taken on a slight flush. Indeed I do. But first, Mr. Rodriguez, you should know that Zara's work on behavioral decision-making could revolutionize how companies approach change management. She's too modest to tell you herself, but several consulting firms have already expressed interest in her findings. After the professor left, an awkward silence settled between them. You didn't mention that other firms were interested in your research, Marcus said finally. You didn't mention that you've been back to Prague twice since I saw you last. Zara's response was gentle but pointed. Marcus felt heat rise in his face. How did you? Prague isn't that big, and you're not exactly inconspicuous when you eat at the same 3 restaurants in lesser town. She leaned forward. The question is why you didn't contact me during those visits. The honesty in her voice undid something in Marcus's chest, because I was afraid this would happen. What? That I'd start rearranging my life around the possibility of seeing you again? That I'd discover I've been going through the motions? For years, and it took meeting someone I can't have to realize it? Zara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. Who says you can't have me? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address directly. But for the first time since arriving in Prague, Marcus felt like he might actually understand what he was chasing. The truth unveiled. 2 months had passed since Marcus's confession at Victor's cafe, and Prague had begun to feel like a second home. He'd extended his stay indefinitely, working remotely and scheduling unnecessary follow-up meetings with Moravec Industries. His assistant Emma had stopped asking pointed questions about his extended European residence, but he could hear the concern in her voice during their daily calls. Zara had successfully defended her thesis. Marcus had been there in the back of the lecture hall when she presented her research on cognitive dissonance in high-stakes decision-making, watching her command the room with quiet authority, fielding questions from professors with the same thoughtful precision she brought to their conversations. He'd felt something shift inside him, a recognition that what he felt for her had evolved far beyond the initial attraction. Now they sat in Pedon Park, overlooking the city, sharing takeaway food from a Vietnamese restaurant Zara had discovered. It had become their routine, finding small, authentic places that tourists never saw, talking about everything except the obvious tension growing between them. My friend Petra thinks I'm being an idiot, Zara said suddenly, breaking into Marcus's thoughts about how the afternoon light caught the gold in her dark hair. About what? About you. She set down her chopsticks and turned to face him directly. She says I'm overthinking a situation that doesn't require analysis, just a decision. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. They'd been dancing around the edges of this conversation for weeks. What kind of decision? Whether to trust that what's happening between us is real, or whether it's just an extended version of what we started with, you paying for my time and me providing a service. The words hit Marcus like cold water. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what to think. Zara's voice carried a vulnerability he'd rarely heard from her. When we met, I was working, you were a client. Everything since then has been undefined, and I've spent 2 years being very careful about keeping those lines clear. Marcus set aside his food, giving her his full attention. Then let me define it. The words came out more simply than he'd intended, without the careful preamble he'd been rehearsing for weeks. Not with some idealized version of you. Not with the fantasy of escaping my real life, but with you. The way you laugh at your own jokes before you tell them. How you argue with professors twice your age without backing down from your research conclusions. The fact that you've never once been impressed by anything about my work except when I told you about the scholarship program my company funds for first-generation college students. Zara stared at him, and he couldn't read her expression. I know this is complicated, Marcus continued. I know I live in London, and you're here finishing your degree. I know we met under circumstances that make everything between us feel questionable. But I also know that I've never felt more like myself than I do when I'm with you. You don't even know me, Zara said quietly. Not really. You know, the version of me that exists in cafes and parks and late-night walks. You don't know that I'm terrible at managing money, that I cry during animated movies, that I have anxiety attacks before every important presentation? Then let me learn those things too. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of the city below. Finally, Zara spoke. I've been offered a consulting position with a firm in London. Marcus felt his heart stop. What Professor Toma recommended me? They want someone who can bridge academic research with practical business applications. The salary would be... She shook her head. Let's just say I could pay off my student loans and actually afford to live somewhere with reliable heating. When? I'd start in September. 2 months from now. Marcus studied her face, looking for clues about what this meant. Have you accepted? Not yet. Zara met his eyes directly. I wanted to talk to you first, because if I take it, I need to. No, whether I'm moving to London for a job opportunity or because of a man. I met under circumstances that still make me question my own judgment. The honesty in her voice undid him completely. Marcus reached for her hands, relieved when she didn't pull away. Take the job, he said. Not for me, but because it sounds like exactly what you've been working toward. And then, if you want, let me take you to dinner. A real dinner, where I'm not your client and you're not working. We're just two people who found each other in an unexpected way and want to see what happens next. Zara smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her all afternoon. Just dinner. Well, Marcus grinned back. Maybe dinner and whatever comes after. I hear London has some excellent late-night walking routes. She laughed, and the sound carried across the park like a promise of all the conversations they hadn't yet had. All the discoveries still waiting for them. All right, Marcus Rodriguez, she said, squeezing his hands. Let's see if what started as a professional arrangement can survive becoming something real. As the sun set over Prague, painting the castle and cathedral spires gold against the darkening, Marcus realized that for the first time in his adult life, he was making a decision based entirely on hope rather than strategy. And somehow, that felt like the most logical choice he'd ever made.